My mom's phone hit the hospital floor so hard the nurse flinched. She didn't even try to pick it up. She was just staring at the man standing behind her and whispering his name like she'd seen a ghost. David? For a second nobody moved. Not the nurse. Not me. Not even him. The heart monitor beside my bed kept beeping at the same steady rhythm, like the room hadn't just cracked open. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Because that moment, the phone hitting the tile and my mother looking like the ground had disappeared under her, only makes sense if you know what happened earlier that week. Actually, earlier than that. There's one small thing I should mention first. When I filled out the hospital paperwork before surgery, the nurse slid the clipboard toward me and asked for an emergency contact. I wrote a name. Then I paused. Just sat there for a second staring at the line where the last name went. The nurse noticed. She said, "Are you sure this person can make medical decisions for you if needed?" I told her yes, but the truth is I hesitated before writing the last name. I don't think the nurse noticed that part. Anyway, that name matters later. I'll come back to it. Hi, I'm Emma. I didn't think I'd ever say this story out loud. Mostly because for a long time I wasn't even sure what parts of it were real and what parts were just things I had convinced myself were normal. You know how when something weird has always been your normal, you stop questioning it. That was my family. Not dramatic. Not screaming matches or broken plates, or any of the stuff people imagine when they hear the word toxic. Just quiet indifference. The kind that makes you feel a little invisible. My parents weren't cruel. They were just busy. Or that's the word they always used. Busy with work. Busy with trips. Busy with plans that couldn't be moved. I learned early that if I needed something big, emotional, medical, anything inconvenient, it usually landed somewhere near the bottom of the priority list. And the weird part is I didn't really realize that until recently. When you grow up in something, you assume it's normal. Looking back now, there were signs. Little ones. Like how my mom never stayed overnight when I had my tonsils removed when I was 12. She said hospitals made her anxious. Or how my dad once missed my senior recital because their anniversary dinner reservation had been impossible to change. At the time I told everyone it was fine. I even believed it. Mostly. But there was one thing that always stuck in my head. Something small. My mom had this habit of getting really tense anytime certain topics came up. Specifically anything about hospitals. Or surgeons. Or, actually, wait. Now that I think about it, it wasn't hospitals exactly. It was one specific hospital across town. She'd changed the subject every time someone mentioned it. I didn't question it then. I just assumed she had a bad experience there or something. But now I know that wasn't the reason. Not even close. Anyway, fast forward to 3 weeks ago. I started getting this sharp pain in my stomach. At first it felt like normal cramps. Annoying but manageable. But by the third day I couldn't stand up straight without feeling like someone had shoved a knife under my ribs. So I drove myself to urgent care. And the doctor took one look at the scan results and said something that made my stomach drop. "You're not going home tonight." Appendix. Emergency surgery. The whole thing escalated weirdly fast. Forms. 4. Nurses moving around like it was just another Tuesday. I remember sitting there on the hospital bed holding my phone and thinking, okay, I guess I should call my parents. Which is funny, in hindsight, because I actually believed they would come. I dialed my mom first. She answered on the third ring. I explained the situation. Emergency surgery. Tonight. There was this pause. Then she said something I still hear in my head sometimes. "Oh, Emma, that's really unfortunate timing." Not "are you okay?" Not "we're coming." Timing. I remember blinking like maybe I misheard. "What do you mean?" Another pause. Then she said it. "We're leaving for Hawaii tomorrow morning." And that's when I realized something. Something that should have been obvious much earlier. But there was another part of that conversation. One thing she said right before hanging up that kept replaying in my head all night, because it didn't sound worried. It sounded almost relieved. And I didn't understand why. Not yet. When my mom said they were leaving for Hawaii the next morning, I actually laughed. Not because it was funny. It was that weird laugh your brain does when it's trying to buy time. Like, maybe I misunderstood. Hawaii, I said. Your father booked it months ago, she replied. It's non-refundable. Non-refundable. That word came up a lot in my house. Flights were non-refundable. Hotel reservations were non-refundable. Dinner reservations were impossible to move, but somehow school plays, doctor visits, and the occasional life event were flexible, at least when they involved me. I remember sitting on the hospital bed with the thin blanket pulled over my legs, staring at the faux tape to my arm. So, you're not coming? I asked. There was this sigh on the other end. Not angry, just mildly inconvenienced. Emma, honey, it's your appendix. People get those removed every day. I didn't know what to say to that, because technically she wasn't wrong. People do get them removed every day, but I think most of them have someone sitting in the waiting room, even if it's just someone holding a bad cup of hospital coffee. My dad's voice appeared faintly in the background. I couldn't hear what he said, but I heard my mom answer him. She'll be fine. Then she came back to me. We already paid for the trip, Emma, and the doctor will take good care of you. The doctor. At the time, that line didn't mean anything to me. Later it would mean a lot, but right then I just said, okay. Because that's what I always said. Okay. I hung up and sat there for a minute looking at my phone screen. The call log still open. I could have called someone else. A friend. My roommate from college. Maybe even my aunt in Denver. But instead I just put the phone down. Because something about the whole conversation had made me feel small. Like I had asked for too much. And here's the embarrassing part. I didn't even get angry. Not right away. I just accepted it. Like I had been trained to do that. I actually remember telling the nurse, when she came in to check my parents are traveling this week, so they probably won't make it. And I said it with this weird little smile. Like I was explaining something totally reasonable. She paused for a second. Not long, but long enough that I noticed. Then she nodded and said, okay, sweetheart, let's just make sure we have a good emergency contact on file. That sentence stuck with me. Good emergency contact. Because technically I had already filled that part out on the form. But suddenly I felt this weird pressure in my chest. Like maybe I should double check. The nurse handed me the clipboard again. Just confirm the contact info, she said. And that's when I looked down at the name I had written earlier. The one I told you about. The one where I hesitated before the last name. For a second I considered scratching it out. Writing my mom's name instead. Even after that phone call. Old habits are strange like that. You still reach for people who keep dropping you. I tapped the pen against the clipboard, thinking. And the nurse must have noticed something on my face because she said quietly, you want someone who will actually answer the phone. That line hit me harder than I expected. Not mean, just honest. So I left the name exactly where it was and handed the clipboard back. There, I said. She glanced at it quickly, then looked back at me. All right, she said. But there was this tiny expression on her face I couldn't quite read. Like she had just connected something. Or maybe recognized the name. I didn't ask. At the time I assumed I was imagining it. The rest of that evening got busy fast. Blood tests. More scans. A surgeon scheduled. The anesthesiologist came in to explain the procedure. Everything moved with that calm hospital efficiency that makes emergencies feel strangely routine. And for a little while, I actually relaxed. Because the staff were kind. One of the nurses joked about hospital pudding. Another tucked an extra blanket around my feet. It almost felt normal. That's the weird thing about hospitals. You can forget why you're there for a minute. But later that night, right before they wheeled me toward the operating room, something happened that I didn't think much about at the time. Now I can't stop thinking about it. A man stepped into the hallway as my bed rolled past. He was wearing surgical scrubs, mask around his neck, chart in his hand. He looked down at me for a brief second. Not long, just long enough that our eyes met, and something about his expression changed, like recognition, or maybe surprise. I figured he was just another doctor on the floor, but a few seconds later I heard him say something to the nurse pushing my bed, quietly, too quiet for me to catch the whole sentence. I only heard the last part. She listed me. And the nurse answered with one word. Yes. At the time, I assumed I had misheard. Hospitals are loud in strange ways. Machines beeping. Wheels rolling over tile. People talking in low voices that bounce off the walls. So when I heard that man say, "She listed me," my brain filed it under probably nothing. I mean, why would it mean anything? I didn't even know who he was. The nurse pushing my bed kept moving toward the operating room doors like nothing unusual had happened, and I was trying very hard not to think about the fact that someone was about to put me under anesthesia, so I let the moment pass, which, looking back now, feels almost ridiculous, because that was probably the first real clue, but I missed it completely. The operating room itself was brighter than I expected. Cold, too. They moved me from the bed to a narrow surgical table, and suddenly there were 3 different people adjusting monitors and explaining things. The anesthesiologist leaned over me with a reassuring smile. "All right, Emma," he said. "We're going to give you something that'll make you sleepy." Sleepy. That word felt very intentional, like he didn't want to say unconscious. I remember nodding and trying to act calm, but my brain was still replaying my conversation with my mom. Really unfortunate timing. Of all the things she could have said. Timing. It sounds petty when I say it now. People say awkward things when they are caught off guard. I told myself that at least 5 times. Actually, more than that. That's something I've noticed about myself. When someone hurts me, my first instinct is to explain it away, to find the version of events where they didn't mean it. Maybe you've done that too. I used to wonder if I was the only one who just accepted things like that for years. Like if you keep lowering the bar long enough, eventually you forget there was ever a bar to begin with. Anyway, the last thing I remember before the anesthesia kicked in was someone adjusting the light above the table, and a voice saying, "Doctor's on his way." Doctor, just a normal sentence. Normal surgery, normal hospital night. That's what I thought. Then everything went dark. When I woke up, the first thing I noticed was the quiet. Not silence exactly. Hospitals are never silent, but the hallway noise was softer, muted, like the world was happening somewhere outside the room. My throat felt dry. My stomach felt strange. Not painful yet, just heavy. The nurse noticed my eyes opening almost immediately. "Hey there," she said gently. "Welcome back." Her voice had that calm tone people use when they are trying not to overwhelm you. Did it work? I croaked, which, in hindsight, was a stupid question. She laughed softly. "Yes, Emma, surgery went well." Relief washed over me so quickly I almost fell back asleep. For a few minutes, everything felt simple. Appendix out. Recovery ahead. Parents on vacation. Life moving on. False calm. That's what it was. Because about 10 minutes later, the nurse said something that didn't fit. "Your contact came by earlier," she mentioned while checking the monitor. I blinked slowly. "My contact?" Ham. He spoke with the surgical team before you woke up." My brain took a second to catch up. "Oh," I said. And here's the thing that's embarrassing to admit. For 1 second, just one, I actually thought maybe my dad had shown up. Like maybe they changed their minds. Maybe Hawaii could wait. But the nurse's next sentence erased that idea immediately. "He seemed very concerned about you." Concerned. That word didn't match my parents' tone earlier. So I asked the obvious question. "Did he leave a message?" The nurse hesitated. Not long, but long enough that my sleepy brain noticed it. "Well," she said carefully, "he'll probably come speak to you himself later." That answer sat strangely in my chest, Because if my parents had somehow made it there after all, why wouldn't she just say your parents? Why he? I tried to push the thought away. Post-surgery brain isn't exactly reliable, but another small detail kept nagging at me, something I noticed on the rolling tray beside the bed. My chart, and clipped to the front of it was the emergency contact form. The same one I had filled out earlier, the one with the name I hesitated before finishing. Someone had circled that name in blue ink, not the phone number, not the address, just the name. And next to it, written in quick handwriting, were 3 words: already on site. At the time I thought that meant the hospital had contacted him, that he happened to be nearby. Simple explanation. Logical. But there was one thing about it that didn't quite make sense. Because I had never actually told that person which hospital I was going to, and somehow he had arrived before I even woke up. I didn't understand how that was possible. Not yet. When you wake up after surgery, your brain moves slower than the rest of the world. People talk to you. Machines beep. Time passes. But everything feels like it's happening through water. So for a while, I just lay there staring at the ceiling tiles and trying to piece together what the nurse had said. Your contact came by earlier. He'll probably come speak to you himself later. He, not they, and the thing written on the form. Already on site. It shouldn't have bothered me as much as it did, but something about it kept tugging at the back of my mind, like a loose thread you keep touching without realizing. Eventually another nurse came in with water and pain medication. She helped me sit up slightly, and that's when I asked the question, did my contact say when he'd come back? She smiled in that polite hospital way. Oh, he never left. That answer made my stomach tighten in a way that had nothing to do with the surgery. He's still here. Down the hall with the surgical team. That didn't make sense. Most emergency contacts come, ask a few questions, maybe sit in the waiting area. They don't stay with the surgeons. Unless they have family. Or something else. The nurse must have seen the confusion on my face, because she added quickly, he's part of the staff. That sentence landed quietly, but it landed heavy. Staff. I repeated. She nodded. Yes, honey, Dr. Walker. Dr. Walker. The name sounded familiar in a distant way, like something I'd heard before but never paid attention to. And suddenly that moment in the hallway came rushing back. The man in scrubs, the quick glance, the quiet question. She listed me? My brain started connecting pieces that I hadn't realized were pieces. I stayed at the chart again, at the circled name, at the handwriting beside it, and for the first time since I woke up, a strange thought crossed my mind. What if the hospital hadn't needed to call him? What if he was already there? The nurse must have noticed my expression shift. Don't worry, she said gently. You're in very good hands. I nodded, but the room suddenly felt smaller, because there was something she didn't say. Something I realized about 2 seconds later. If the doctor was already on site, if he was involved with the surgical team, if he had come by before I woke up, then there was a decent chance he had also been in the operating room. I opened my mouth to ask that question, but before I could, someone knocked lightly on the doorframe. The nurse turned first. Oh, she said. Perfect timing. And then she stepped aside. The man who walked in was the same one I'd seen in the hallway earlier, taller than I expected, early 50s maybe, still wearing scrubs, though the surgical cap was gone now. He paused just inside the room like he wasn't sure how close to come. Then he looked at me, not at the chart, not at the monitor, at me, and something about that look felt complicated. Not professional distance, not casual curiosity, something heavier, like recognition mixed with hesitation. Hi, Emma, he said quietly. His voice was calm. Careful. Your surgery went well. I nodded slowly. Thank you. A normal conversation would have ended there. Doctor reassures patient. Patient rests. But neither of us moved. There was this strange pause hanging in the room. like both of us were waiting for the other person to explain something. Finally, I said the only thing that made sense. Are you the one who came earlier? His eyes flicked briefly to the chart, then back to me. Yes. Another pause. Then he added something that made my chest tighten. I'm glad you listed me. That sentence echoed strangely in the quiet room, because it sounded almost personal. And before I could figure out why, the nurse spoke again. I'll give you 2 a minute. 2. Not doctor and patient. 2 people. She stepped out and closed the door, leaving just the 2 of us in the room. The man, Dr. Walker, exhaled slowly, like someone about to start a difficult conversation. But instead he just asked a simple question. Are you feeling okay? I nodded again, but my mind was racing, because there was something about his face that was starting to bother me. Not in a bad way, just familiar. The kind of familiarity that sits right on the edge of recognition. And then he said something that confused me even more. I didn't expect our first meeting to be like this. First meeting. Those words hung there, and I realized something. I had been so focused on the hospital, the surgery, my parents' trip, that I hadn't stopped to question the most obvious thing. Why was this man my emergency contact? Actually, I need to stop here for a second, because if I keep telling the story without explaining something, none of the next part will make sense. There's a piece of this that I didn't know for most of my life. A piece that changes everything you've heard so far. And the truth is, I didn't discover it in the hospital. I discovered it months earlier, completely by accident, because one afternoon, while cleaning out an old kitchen drawer, I found an envelope with a name on it. A name that didn't belong to anyone in my family. David Walker. And that's when the real story actually started. Okay, before I keep going with the hospital part, I need to rewind a few months. Because the truth is, the moment my mom dropped her phone in that hospital room didn't start that day. It started in my parents' kitchen, with a drawer that jammed. You know the kind. The one full of random stuff nobody throws away. Expired coupons, old takeout menus, batteries that may or may not still work. I was home for the weekend helping my mom clean before they left for another trip. I pulled the drawer open too hard and half the contents slid onto the floor. And underneath all that clutter, there was a single envelope. Thin, yellowed a little with age. My name wasn't on it. My mom's was. But what caught my attention was the return address printed in the corner. St. Catherine's Medical Center, the hospital across town. The one my mom always changed the subject about. That alone would have made me curious. But the name beneath the address is what made me pause. Dr. David Walker. I didn't know why it stuck with me. Doctors send bills all the time. But something about the way my mom reacted when I casually asked about it later that evening felt off. She froze. Just for a second. Then she said, very quickly, "Oh, that's old paperwork. Nothing important." Too quick, too rehearsed, and suddenly my brain started replaying every weird moment connected to that hospital. Every time she changed the subject. Every time she looked tense. That envelope sat in my thoughts for days after that. I almost let it go. Almost. But curiosity is a stubborn thing once it starts growing. A week later, I ordered a DNA kit. I didn't tell anyone, not even my closest friend. At the time, I convinced myself it was just curiosity, just something people my age did for fun. Family trees, ancestry results. But the truth is, part of me already suspected something. The results came back 3 weeks later, and I remember sitting on my apartment floor staring at the screen. Because one name had appeared under close biological matches. Not distant. Not fourth cousin. Close. Very close. David Walker. And right under it the relationship prediction. Parent. I actually laughed out loud. Not because it was funny. Because it felt impossible. My dad, the man who raised me, had always been, well, my dad. Quiet. Distant sometimes. But still my dad. So seeing another man's name there didn't make sense. Until I started comparing photos. The website had a small profile picture, Gray hair, kind eyes. The same man I had passed a dozen times in the hallway of St. Catherine's over the years when visiting friends. Because Dr. David Walker wasn't just any doctor. He was one of the hospital's senior surgeons. That's when something clicked. The hospital my mom avoided. The envelope. The tension whenever his name came up in conversation on local news segments about the hospital. It all started forming a shape. But I didn't confront my parents. I couldn't. Not yet. Instead, I did something strange. I emailed him. Short message. Very simple. I didn't accuse him of anything. I just said I had received DNA results and thought there might be a connection. I expected silence. Or confusion. Maybe even denial. Instead, he replied the next morning. 3 sentences. Polite. Careful. But unmistakably shocked. And we met. Twice. Just coffee. Quiet conversations in neutral places. He told me he had never known my mom was pregnant, that she left town shortly after they broke up, that he had spent 20 years assuming she had simply moved on. There was no dramatic confrontation, no yelling, just 2 people trying to process a truth that had arrived very late. So when I landed in the hospital months later with emergency surgery, I faced a choice. List my parents. I'll list the man who had just discovered he had a daughter. And this is where the story gets a little complicated, because I still don't know if I made the right decision. I wrote David Walker on that emergency contact line. Part of me believed he deserved to know if something happened. Another part of me wondered if it was unfair to involve him so quickly. Sometimes I still question that moment. Was I trying to protect myself, or was I forcing a relationship neither of us fully understood yet? I genuinely don't know. But what I do know is this. When the hospital staff saw the name on that form, they didn't need to call him. He was already there. And the reason my mom dropped her phone in that hospital room 3 days later is because the man standing behind her, the surgeon who had just operated on me, was the same man she had spent 20 years pretending didn't exist. 3 days after the surgery, the room had settled into that slow, strange rhythm hospitals get once the emergency part is over. Morning vitals, afternoon hallway noise, the quiet hum of machines that you eventually stop noticing. Dr. Walker had stopped by a few times since the operation. Never long, just short visits, checking the incision, asking how the pain felt, making sure I was eating something other than hospital gelatin. Professional, careful, almost distant, which made sense. We had only met twice before all this. Coffee shops, awkward conversations, 2 people trying to build a bridge across 20 years. Neither of us really knew what to call each other yet. So in the hospital we stayed inside the safe boundaries. Doctor, patient. But there was one small detail I kept noticing. Every time he walked into the room, he would glance at the door first, like he expected someone else to appear. I didn't ask about it. I had my own thoughts to sort through, because while I was recovering, my parents were apparently posting beach photos. My cousin texted me one of them the night before. My mom smiling in front of the ocean. My dad holding a coconut drink. The caption read, "Finally relaxing." That word stuck with me. Relaxing. Meanwhile, I was learning how to sit up without feeling like my stomach might split open. I stayed at that photo longer than I want to admit. Then I put my phone down and told myself something simple. This is information, not a surprise, just confirmation. And that realization gave me a strange kind of calm. But that calm didn't last very long, because the next morning the door to my hospital room swung open without a knock. My mom stepped inside like she owned the place. Her sunglasses were still on, which felt oddly out of place under fluorescent lights. "Emma," she said sharply. I blinked. "You're back already?" She pulled the glasses up onto her head. "Yes, because apparently you told the hospital we're not your emergency contacts." There it was. "No, how are you feeling?" "No, I heard the surgery went okay. Just administrative outrage." I sat up slowly. "They asked for someone who could be here." Her expression tightened. We would have come if it was serious. I looked down at the bandage across my stomach, the quiet room, the 4-line tape to my arm, and I said something before I could stop myself. It was serious. For a second she didn't respond. Then she waved her hand like she was brushing away the conversation. Well, the point is you need to get discharged early. I frowned. Early? Yes. Your father and I had to change our flights because of this whole situation. That sentence hung in the air, like the surgery had somehow been an inconvenience to their vacation schedule. You're stable now, she continued. There's no reason to stay here another night. The nurse standing near the doorway shifted uncomfortably. Discharge decisions are made by the attending surgeon. That's fine, my mom cut in. I'll speak with him. And right then, right on cue, the door behind her opened again. Dr. Walker stepped inside. The timing was almost surreal, like the room had been waiting for this exact moment. My mom didn't notice him immediately. She was still facing me, still mid-sentence, because we really need to get home and sort out. Then she turned and saw him. The change in her face happened so fast it almost looked like a glitch. Her posture froze. Her eyes widened, and the phone she had been holding slipped straight out of her hand. It hit the floor with that sharp crack I told you about at the beginning. No one moved. The nurse looked from one of them to the other, completely confused. But my mom didn't seem to notice anyone else in the room anymore. She was staring directly at him, like she had just seen something impossible. "David," she whispered. Dr. Walker didn't answer right away. His expression wasn't angry or shocked. It was something quieter, the kind of expression people have when a truth they've carried privately suddenly steps into the open. And my mom's voice came out again, this time louder. "How? When did you two?" She gestured weakly between us. The question hung there, unfinished, 20 years of silence packed inside it. The nurse looked at me, waiting. Dr. Walker looked at me too, not telling me what to say, just waiting. And that's when I realized something important. For the first time in this entire situation, the truth wasn't mine to hide. So I answered her, calmly, "He's been here the whole time." My mom's face drained of color, and for a second I thought that would be the end of it. But then she said something I never expected. Something so quiet that only the three of us heard it. "You told him." Not a question, an accusation. And that's when I said the sentence that ended 20 years of pretending. I didn't have to. For a few seconds after I said that, the room felt completely still. Not the peaceful kind of still. The kind where everyone is waiting to see what breaks first. My mom looked from me to Dr. Walker and back again. Her mouth opened slightly like she wanted to argue, but nothing came out, which, honestly, shocked me more than anything else. Because my mom always had a response, always a reason, always a way to redirect a conversation some way safer. But this time the ground had shifted too suddenly. The nurse quietly slipped out of the room. Probably the smartest decision anyone made that morning. That left just the three of us. My mom bent down slowly and picked up her phone from the floor. The screen had cracked near the corner. She stared at it for a moment like she needed something ordinary to focus on. Then she finally looked up again. Her voice came out tight. "How long?" she asked. Dr. Walker answered before I could. "Emma contacted me a few months ago." My mom flinched. Not dramatically, just a small twitch in her jaw. "And you believed her," she said. He didn't raise his voice, didn't argue. We confirmed it. That sentence seemed to hit her harder than anything else, because confirmation means evidence. Evidence means the secret is no longer a secret. She turned toward me then, and I braced myself. I expected anger, blame, maybe even the kind of emotional speech people give in movies when their past catches up with them. But instead, she sat down, right there in the visitor chair beside the bed, and suddenly she looked older, not physically, just tired in a way I had never seen before. Her shoulders sagged. Her hands rested loosely in her lap, and when she spoke again, The anger was gone. You weren't supposed to find out like this, she said quietly. I didn't know how to respond to that, because there were about 100 possible answers to that sentence. None of them felt useful. Dr. Walker stayed near the door. He wasn't trying to dominate the moment, which I respected. This was clearly something between my mom and me now. She rubbed her forehead slowly. Then she said something that caught me completely off guard. I thought I was protecting you. Protecting me. I actually let out a small laugh before I could stop myself. From what? She didn't answer right away. Instead, she looked toward Dr. Walker, not with anger, not with resentment, just history. The kind of look people share when a chapter of their lives never really closed. We were young, she said. That's not an answer, I replied. She exhaled slowly. No, she admitted. It's not. And then something happened that I never expected. My mom's voice softened in a way I had almost never heard before. You looked so much like him when you were born. The sentence hung there, fragile. I thought if I told your father, it would destroy everything. That word caught my attention. Your father, meaning the man who raised me, not the one standing 3 feet away. She continued quietly. He loved you from the moment he held you, and I couldn't risk losing that. For the first time in the entire conversation, I saw something that looked like regret, not the defensive regret people perform. Real regret. And I didn't know what to do with that. Because anger is easier. Anger gives you direction. Regret just sits there between people. Dr. Walker finally spoke again. His voice calm. You could have told me. My mom looked at him, and for a second the room felt like it had rewound 20 years. You were finishing your residency, she said softly. You were about to move across the country. That wasn't your decision to make. No, she agreed. It wasn't. Silence settled again. But this time it felt different. Less explosive. More complicated. And that's when something unexpected happened. My mom stood up, walked over to the bed, and very carefully adjusted the corner of my blanket. It was such a small action. But I realized something strange. I couldn't remember the last time she had done something that gentle for me. You should stay the extra night, she said quietly. The doctor will know what's best. She glanced toward Dr. Walker when she said that, and for the first time since she entered the room, there was no bitterness in her voice, just acceptance. Then she picked up her bag. I'll come back later, she said, and she left the room. The door clicked shut behind her. I sat there for a minute staring at the wall, trying to process what had just happened, because the confrontation I had imagined in my head never actually happened. There was no explosion, no dramatic apology, just a quiet unraveling of something that had been hidden for 20 years. Finally, I looked over at Dr. Walker. He was still standing near the door, hands in his pockets, looking slightly overwhelmed. Well, I said, that was something. He let out a breath that sounded almost like a laugh. Yes, he said. Then he looked at me for a long moment and asked something that surprised me even more. Are you okay? Not the surgeon question, the real one. And for the first time since all of this started, I realized something. The hardest part of the story wasn't the secret. It was figuring out what came next. After my mom left the room, the quiet felt different. Not heavy like before, more like the air after a storm when everything is still settling. Dr. Walker pulled the visitor chair a little closer to the bed and sat down. Not too close. Still careful. We had both learned that about each other over the last few months. Neither of us rushed emotional territory. For a minute we didn't say anything. The heart monitor kept its steady rhythm. Somewhere down the hall a cart rattled past. Normal hospital sounds. Finally he spoke. I'm sorry that happened here. I shrugged a little. Honestly, this might have been the safest place for it. He smiled slightly. Fair point. And then he asked the question I had been avoiding inside my own head. Do you regret telling me? The thing is, I didn't answer right away, because I had wondered about that more than once. The night I sent that first email, the first time we met for coffee, even when I wrote his name on that emergency contact form, there was always that voice in the back of my mind asking if I was forcing something that didn't belong in my life yet, or maybe ever. But sitting there in that hospital bed, replaying the last 10 minutes in my head, I realized something. No, I said finally. I don't regret it. He nodded slowly, not relieved exactly, just thoughtful. Neither do I, he said. And that was the moment something shifted. Not into some perfect father-daughter relationship. Life doesn't work like that, but the possibility of one existed now. And that felt enough. I stayed in the hospital one more night like he recommended. My mom came back later that evening. We talked a little. Nothing dramatic, mostly quiet questions. She explained some things about those years that I had never heard before. Some of it made sense. Some of it didn't. Real life rarely wraps itself up neatly. That's something I'm still learning. My dad, the man who raised me, still doesn't know the full story yet. That's one of the parts of this that remains unresolved. And honestly, I don't know what the right decision is there. Some truths change more than one life when they surface. I'm still figuring out whether that's a conversation I'm ready to have. But there's something else I keep thinking about. That emergency contact form. The one where I hesitated before writing the last name. I realize now why my hand paused there. Because that moment was the first time I acknowledged the truth in writing. Emma Walker. Not the name I grew up with, but a name that had been part of my story the entire time without me knowing it. Funny how a single line on a hospital form can hold that much weight. The nurse who handed me that clipboard probably forgot the interaction 5 minutes later. But for me it was the beginning of everything that followed. A few days after I got discharged, Dr. Walker, David, I'm still getting used to that, took me to lunch. Nothing fancy, just a small diner near the hospital. We talked about ordinary things, movies, work, the fact that I apparently inherited his terrible sense of direction. It was the most normal conversation we had ever had, and maybe that's what made it meaningful, because sometimes healing doesn't happen in big dramatic moments. Sometimes it happens quietly, one conversation at a time. My relationship with my mom is still complicated, probably always will be. But that day in the hospital changed something, not because the secret came out, but because, for the first time, it stopped controlling everything underneath the surface. And I guess that's the strange part about truths. They are heavy while they are hidden, but once they are out in the open, they start to lose that power. Before I end this story, I want to ask you something. Have you ever discovered something about your family that changed the way you understood your entire childhood? Not something huge and dramatic, just a truth that suddenly made a lot of old moments make sense. Because that's what this felt like for me. A puzzle finally clicking into place. So that's my story, folks. If it resonated with you, go ahead and hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, and tell me in the comments where you're listening from. I want to know how far Emma's voice travels. Sometimes the truth doesn't break a family. Sometimes it's the first honest step toward rebuilding one.